everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Care and Connection, Renewing Educator Spirit Mid-Year. First, I just want to say thank you all for saying yes. So yes to being here right now, and yes for allowing yourself permission to really reprioritize your wellness as you bring your open minds into this space today, especially during this time in the school year. So we all know that your time is very valuable, and we're grateful that you've chosen to spend at least the next 30 minutes with us. We know that as educators, we do so much for others, and this webinar is going to be a slight deviation from our student-focused work, and it's an intentional shift from that to really highlight how to use Thrively from an educator-centered perspective to really recenter and renew ourselves so we can continue to support one another as we create those conditions for learning where everyone can actually thrive. So whether you're a classroom teacher, a counselor, an administrator, or somewhere in between, I like to say that this webinar is for you. I'm mindful that 30 minutes does go by really quickly, so let us get started. And so first, I invite you to give yourself permission to just breathe, right? Let's take a deep breath in for 3 seconds and exhale. So my question to all of you now is, how are you feeling and functioning right now, right? Not just professionally, but personally. So I invite you to just pause and reflect for about 30 seconds on looking at the visuals on your screen. Then if you wouldn't mind, type your name, your location, and the number of the visual that you feel captures how you may be feeling and functioning right now. And so I'll model the way before a formal introduction. My name is Marion. I am currently in Prince George's County, Maryland. And right now, I would say I am a number 9. Like, let's do this. And so 20 to 30 seconds, name, where you're located, and the number that you feel represents where you may be right now, how you may be feeling and functioning. I see we're cascading that in the chat. Thank you all for participating and joining us today. Seeing some numbers there. Thank you all for joining us. Another 15 seconds or so. Name, location, and this is the visual that I feel captures where I am, December 2025. Thank you all for sharing. And so now that we see just a few of the people that are in the room and what energy we may be bringing to this space, I want to formally introduce myself. I am Dr. Marion Smith Jr. I'm the Chief Learning Officer here at Thrively, and over the past 24 years, yes, 24, I thank my mom and dad for good genes, I've served in a variety of K through 12 education capacities across 6 states. So right before joining Thrively, I served as an assistant state superintendent for the Maryland State Department of Education. And additionally, as a career-long educator, I've had the privilege of serving in a variety of spaces in capacities: classroom teacher, school principal, chief academic officer, and superintendent of schools. I was born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada, so there are a few of us that were born and raised in Sin City beyond that one street that people call the Las Vegas Strip. And I began my teaching and administrative career in my hometown in the Clark County School District, which some may know or may not know is the 5th largest school district in the country, educating over 300,000 pre-K through 12 students. I share all of that because over the past 2 decades, my work has really been anchored in how are we disrupting and dismantling all of those inequitable policies, practices, procedures, and overall systems to create those enabling conditions so that everyone in the system can actually thrive. And thrive with an understanding that as leaders and educators, we cannot provide what we do not have. And that leadership is really about understanding ourselves. And that's really critical. I'm also the co-founder of the Racial Equity Adaptive Leadership Framework. And for those of you that play Uno, I am the self-proclaimed Uno champion. So I challenge anyone to a Uno duel, right? As challenge, I'm ready. And so now a little bit about Thrively and a few logistics to ensure that we do have a smooth session. I want to begin with one powerful question we ask at Thrively. And that question is, what's strong with you. And so here at Thrively, our mission is to bring a paradigm shift in education by creating the conditions for learning that move away from this deficit lens of what's wrong with you to an asset-based approach of what's actually strong with us. So it's that one shift is how we begin to really humanize learning. And we do this by partnering with educators, schools, and school districts across the country to create strengths-based, joyful, and hopeful learning environments that increase student academic outcomes. So, this idea, what's strong with you, is more than a catchphrase. It's the foundation of everything we do. So, every action step we take is really designed to help educators put this question into practice, to really make the strengths visible, to make them actionable and transformative in your learning environments. And so, if you like this What's Strong with You visual, a link will either be placed in the chat to access the digital image, or it's actually going to be sent in a follow-up email. All of the resources that I share today, including a recording, will actually be sent as a follow-up to our webinar. So, what are we actually exploring today? So, in our time together, we are going to do three things. As you see on our screen, number one, identify what are those enabling conditions that really strengthen educational or strengthen student educational outcomes and renew educator spirit. So rarely do we have opportunities to begin to focus on both. They're strengthening student educational outcomes while they are supporting us as educators, renewing our educator spirit. Secondly, we're going to explore a portion of the Thrively framework, specifically those practical tools and strategies and those research-backed resources to support educator self-care. And lastly, we're going to spend a little bit of time to have you think through developing a plan of action to foster or just deepen your supportive and resilient culture of care in your own learning community. So, three specific action steps for us as we move forward. So, with that, if I could just see cascading in the chat the number one, if we are ready to begin. We're ready. We know what we're going to do. We're excited to be able to talk a little bit about some of those resources. So I see a few there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So to give me that energy there. And so with this understanding, let's set the stage. So why is creating a culture of care so important for us and our fellow educators? I like to say that the evidence is loud and clear. So as we think about our current K through 12 education landscape. So as you see on your screen, as evidenced by the National Center for Education Statistics, approximately 40% of teachers leave the profession within their first 5 years. We know that, or we've learned that this turnover not only affects student learning, but it also impacts budget and finances for our districts as they're constantly recruiting and training new staff. Research also shows us that more than 50% of teachers and educators report feeling stressed on a daily basis, with stress levels higher than in most other professions. We've learned also that the pandemic really exacerbated existing challenges, leading to increased stress and mental health issues among our fellow educators. And additionally, around 27% of our educator colleagues experience symptoms of depression, which we learn can really affect and impact teaching effectiveness and those interactions with students. And lastly, teachers report spending on average over 10 hours per week on unpaid additional work, which begins to impact their personal lives and contributes to burnout. So, noteworthy but not listed on the slide are additional challenges noted by the Learning Policy Institute around financial pressures and student behavior and engagement issues that we also see contributing to this teacher educator burnout and challenging our spirit in this moment. So we know that all of these challenges and many more highlight just the urgent need for cultivating and supporting a caring work environment for all of our educators. There. And so with this understanding, Thrively has actually taken decades of research and we've turned it into a framework that you can actually implement, support, and operationalize. So that's the key there. How are we going to implement it? How are we going to support it? And how are we going to operationalize it? And we call that the core four, the enabling conditions for learning. So here's a quick snapshot of the four conditions for learning that must be operationalized, supported, and implemented so that we can create that culture where educators' strengths are celebrated, where their well-being is supported, and hope is instilled. And so we identify and amplify strengths in every educator. So by helping educators name and live out their unique strengths through our industry first strengths assessment, this is the foundational approach to really understanding how that serves as a catalyst for everything. Second condition for learning is we support psychological well-being, supporting how educators are feeling and functioning using our well-being index. The third enabling condition for learning is we instill hope. So, not as an emotion, but as a measurable cognitive trait. So, through the Hope Survey, we help develop both agency and pathways towards reaching our goals. And lastly, we build authentic connections because deep, meaningful relationships are the foundation for trust, learning, and growth. So, these aren't just nice ideas, colleagues. They're actionable, they're measurable, and they're rooted in science. So you'll notice on your screen that there are, of the core four, only three are highlighted: strengths, well-being, and hope. So these will be the three that I'll focus on for the remainder of our time together. Connections and conditions number four is actually going to be addressed in a separate webinar later this month as part of an educator panel. And so thinking about amplifying and using educator strengths. Strategy number one, thinking about it. So what are we actually doing in this space? So enabling condition number one is how do we identify, make visible, and celebrate educator strengths? So my question to all of you is, do you know your top strengths? Second question, do you know the top strengths of your colleagues? And if you do, how do you and your colleagues use those strengths? How do you celebrate those strengths? And when you work with each other, when you work with students, when you work with other colleagues, and when you work with the community. And so what we're going to do now is talk through a few of these tools and resources to move this work forward. So the first step as we think about amplifying educator strength is to have educators, to have all of you revisit your K through 12 schooling journey. And with that in mind, to be able to take the Thrively Strengths Assessment. Remember, it's an industry first, research based strengths assessment that was developed for children and adolescents by board certified pediatric neuropsychologists. One of the reasons we asked our educators to take this specific assessment developed for children and adolescents is because it allows for you to get back into that mindset of what was I thinking during that time of K through 12 schooling, right? For adults, the assessment takes about 15 to 25 minutes to complete. And when you finish, you actually receive a personalized strengths profile that highlights your top 5 unique strengths. So this assessment does more than just give a report. It actually helps educators either reaffirm or it challenges what you thought your top strengths were, who you think you are or who you've operated as a learner. It shifts that inner narrative from, okay, this is what I might be bad at, to this is what I naturally bring to the table. So this is the foundation. So I invite you to think about this. Before we begin to ask students to actually perform, we have to really affirm who they really are. So why don't we actually take the time to do that, not only for ourselves, but for our colleagues as well? So strengths aren't just an activity. They're a way of seeing and really knowing and informing how educators see, feel valued, and are celebrated. So after taking the strengths assessment and making those strengths visible, I'm going to highlight a few different strategies that I've seen or that have met success with a few of our school district partners who are celebrating educator strengths. And so thinking about amplifying and using our educator strengths, three strategies. Strategy number one is a recognition board. And so educators celebrate team members, collaboration, their growth, their achievements by just creating a space. So whether that's physical or digital, where team members post each other's wins. Strategy number two is a 15-minute skill share where educators promote continuous learning. So educators dedicate about 15 minutes in a weekly meeting for a team member to either teach a quick skill or to present on a topic of interest. And strategy number three that has been surfacing for quite some time is an idea lottery that encourages creativity and new ideas. And so team members are submitting anonymous ideas and they choose one of those to actually implement each month. So, quick strategies to think about how am I amplifying and how am I using educator strengths, my own strengths, in spaces in my learning environment. So, I invite you to think about your own learning community and how you could use one or more of these strategies to support educator strengths. On your screen, you just see pictures. And so, not just talking about the work, but we're seeing real positive impact for our education partners engaging in the work of creating this culture of care and this culture of hope. So, here are two pictures from a recent Thrively session with the school district engaged in this work. Left hand lower quadrant, they're identifying what is strong with us as a school, as a staff, looking at the strengths, identifying their top five strengths. Upper right hand corner, see our educators taking the strengths assessment, getting their personalized strengths profile, engaging with our strengths cards, and having those conversations. Wow, I didn't know that Marion was this, or I thought my top strengths were this. However, this is giving me another way to think about how I may show up in this space. So the first step is enabling condition number one, really elevating and amplifying educator strengths. Enabling condition number two is to support educator well-being. At Thrively, we define well-being as the intersection of how we are feeling and how we are functioning. So let's calibrate that for a minute. So feeling is about our sense of belonging and safety. Functioning is about how we engage with our learning, with our relationships, and our goals. So together, feeling plus functioning equals well-being. So a question that I have to the group is how often do we actually stop to check in on how we're feeling and functioning before we jump right into teaching that next lesson, before we start the next staff meeting, or before we engage in a conversation that may or may not be heated? That's why we've actually partnered with Arizona State University and the Center for Whole Child Education to create the Wellbeing Index. It's a 60 to 90-second check-in built on over 20 years of research. So the Wellbeing Index is a tool to provide direct, quick, systemic information that captures a holistic view of our sense of our own physical, emotional, and social health. So it's designed to provide actionable data in less time than it actually takes us as educators to take classroom attendance. So once educators actually complete their check-in, they're not just left with a gut feeling, they actually receive real-time visual data that gives them a clear picture of how they are actually doing. And once educators have this quick information about their well-being, the real power comes in how they begin to use that data as they're working with students, as they're working with families, and as they're working with their fellow colleagues. And so thinking about supporting educator well-being, here are four specific strategies that are meeting with success from a few of our school district and school partners in this particular space around well-being. So strategy number one extends that well-being check-in by utilizing the well-being check-in regularly. And so educators are using this during each of their team meetings or their staff meetings, where they begin with a 60 to 90-second well-being check-in. And then over time, the team leaders, the PLC leaders, or the school leaders are reviewing just that data to notice trends and to use that to inform action steps. An example from a school leader said, wow, when we started implementing this every week, we saw that on certain days of the week, certain team members or certain grade levels had lower well-being scores or higher well-being scores, and it was a consistent trend. Like every Thursday, it was this lower, or every Tuesday, it was higher. So they had those conversations around what was happening during that time. Oh, we were engaged in testing. Oh, we were engaged in this, or this happened in our particular community. So it allowed for real-time visible data to inform those conversations. So maybe I might need to have a different type of conversation with my colleague because I've seen over the last 3 or 4 weeks that their well-being has been really low or medium, or just having that personal conversation with them, because we know that systems and structures and processes aren't created just by a piece of paper. It's created by people who feel connected. And it's all about having that data to understand where are people at during a particular time. Strategy number two is a gratitude journal, and it's helping educators focus on positive aspects of their daily experiences. And so we have some schools that during their team meetings, educators end with time for specific staff members to share what they say, like, what is your win of the week? What may be a laugh of the week? What may be a moment of joy of the week, right? Just to understand I like to say that educators do the world's most important work because we are nation builders and it can be heavy at times. And so how do we build in that time for gratitude and ending our meeting opportunities with that space of gratitude and sharing out with others something joyous. And the third strategy is what some schools and school districts are calling a no meeting Monday. So this may look different in your context. I'm mindful that some schools and school districts have early release days, others do not. In this particular context, they have no meeting Mondays, and that's where it's used to really focus on deep work. And whether it's asynchronous collaboration or synchronous collaboration, there's no meetings allowed to happen during that time. It's just an opportunity to really engage in focusing on self and or working with a colleague to focus on wellness strategies and resources. And another strategy that's standing out for some of our school districts and school partners are mindfulness and meditation sessions. So sometimes they call them Wellness Wednesdays. Pick a day of the week. It could be Mindful Mondays, it could be Terrific Thursdays, it could be Fantastic Fridays, but at least one day a week, they're gathering educators together to participate in exercises and activities as a part of the weekly schedule. And so, as a chief academic officer in St. Louis Public Schools, I created monthly Fun Fridays. I told you I'm the Uno champion of the world or the universe. And so we built in that, we brought in food that was catered by our culinary arts students. We had music set up. It was just in our conference room area. And if you were available between these particular lunch hour times in central office, feel free to come down to the academic division where we would have adult coloring books and music, all of those things just to create that atmosphere of building on wellness. As a classroom teacher, when I first started out, I taught secondary English and I taught at the middle school level and at the high school level, and I taught in teams. And so I was the English teacher, a part of a math, social studies, and history team. And it depended on the day. We would have one day a week during our prep period where it would be like standing meetings or walking meetings, right? We would go together. We're talking about the things that we need to accomplish, but it's not sitting in a classroom, sitting in a meeting space, just walking around campus or going off campus and walking around. And so just creating a different way for us to focus on physical and mental wellness. Those different strategies around that mindfulness and meditation sessions. Once again, think about your particular current context. And if being able to support educator well-being, not only your own, but others, is an area of focus, think about some strategies that you may be able to incorporate into your everyday practice. The final enabling condition that I'm going to talk about today, and I'll highlight, is condition number 3. It's instilling hope. At Thrively, we say, when we talk about hope, we're not talking about hope as an emotion, but we're talking about hope as a cognitive trait. So this is anchored in the work of Dr. Rick Schneider's groundbreaking work on hope theory in 2000. And hope is defined in measurable terms, and it's a cognitive process and a motivational mindset for how we achieve our goals. And it's characterized by 3 components. So the first component is goals. So that's the desired future that we want. The second is pathways. Those are the abilities for us to plan routes to actually accomplish our goals. And the third is agency. It's our belief in our own capacity to be able to utilize those pathways, even when we have detours to actually accomplish that goal. And so the screen that you see in front of you now, there's a lot of information, so don't be overwhelmed by that. But I wanted to pull from the headlines and all of the research that this slide is really a snapshot of the power of hope in education. So over the last 25 years, some of us may know that researchers have actually conducted neuroanalysis of the frontal cerebral cortex of the brain. And that's where hope actually resides. And we've learned quite a few things from a lot of that research. And we've also learned about the power of hope. And for our particular context, the power of hope in education. So, what have we learned? We've learned that hope is measurable. We've learned that hope is malleable. We've learned that hope mediates all anxiety in the brain and it begins to transform our cognitive learning functions. We know that hope is the primary predictor of academic, career, and life success. We've also learned that hope develops resilience. And when we are resilient, we're able to overcome many, many obstacles and challenges. But lastly, we've learned that hope is actually contagious. So I shared a little bit about this. I'm going to talk a little bit about the first strategy in instilling hope in our educators, and that's with taking the Thrively Hope Survey. So we developed this Hope Survey inspired again by Dr. Rick Schneider's work. And the Hope Survey is a quick 2-minute questionnaire that's going to actually provide you baseline data on your level of hope. And it can actually be administered quarterly or at the beginning or end of each semester. And it's going to measure and track how you're nurturing hope over time. Again, hope is broken up into two specific categories, agency and pathways. We also like to call that the willpower and the way power. And we've actually partnered with Kathleen Beachboard, that some of you may be familiar with. She's a Virginia educator of over 20 years, a researcher, and she's the best-selling author of The School of Hope, to actually bring hope to as many schools and school districts across the country. I'm going to share a resource so that you can learn a little bit more about hope and the Hope Survey with a link either in the chat or in the follow-up email. And so what we have learned is that instilling hope doesn't just change how we feel, it changes how we think, how we act, and how we persist. And that's what drives long-term success, right? So thinking about instilling educator hope, I'll highlight two strategies that are specific to the resources that have been created here at Thrively that have met success with a few of our schools and school districts who are leading in this particular space. And so as you see on your screen, strategy number one is being able to incorporate the Thrively resources and those lessons, specifically a playlist. A playlist is a compilation or collection of specific lessons on a particular topic. And we've curated specific lessons for adults. We have over 100,000 minutes of standards-based aligned content in 14 different content areas. And we've also carved out specific resources for the adult learners as well. And this is one of them in the Hope area, that they're incorporating these into their PLC meetings. They're incorporating this into their own self-paced learning. And they're really focusing on those key areas of what it means to create a hopeful school culture. And the other strategy that we found success in schools is they're creating vision and purpose workshops that really help educators reconnect with their passions. Oftentimes, if you work in the gifted and talented spaces, you have the genius hours or the passion projects. But what does that look like for adults? And they're being able to create these vision and purpose workshops as a part of their regularly scheduled PLCs or data meetings or staff meetings, where they're able to reconnect with their actual passions for teaching and really refine what their personal and professional visions and goals are. They're utilizing the data from the strengths assessment, from the Hope Survey, from the well-being check-ins to create this roadmap of what wellness means for them as educators in this space. So I've shared quite a bit of information, and as I said, 30 minutes is a real short amount of time. And before we end our time today, though, I want you to actually experience one of the enabling conditions for learning. So you'll have the opportunity to scan the QR code, or if you are here and you registered for the session, there will be a link in the follow-up email where you'll have an opportunity to access the Hope Survey on your own. Remember, it takes 2 minutes and it'll give you your hope score immediately. There are no right or wrong answers. It's just a simple snapshot of how you see your ability to set goals and find your way toward them right now. So if you are in a space where you can complete these HOPE survey, feel free to do so. If not, this information will be provided in a follow-up email so that you can take it and look at it at your leisure. So as you complete the actual survey, though, think about how this could feel for a student and for our educator colleagues to have just our inner drive and our potential named, measured, and nurtured. Right. So this tool actually gives us visibility into something we rarely stop to ask about. So how do we see the future and how does that relate to our goals, our agency, and our actual pathways? As some of you may be taking the actual HOPE survey, I'll speak really quickly about the numbers that you'll actually receive. So the scores on the HOPE survey range from 2 to 36. Each question is rated on a scale, and then combined, the total gives you a snapshot of your current level of hope. So a score of 20 or higher is considered mid to high hope, and that's where we start to see the most significant cognitive and emotional impact. So according to research, when students or even adults reach this threshold, we've essentially like rewired how we think about challenges, how we think about goals, how we think about our own self-efficacy to accomplish what we've established. And we begin to see ourselves, our relationships, and those challenges in more clarity and more confidence, and we're able to persist. So think about that as it relates to yourself and to the other adults in your actual context. And what we've learned, the best part about this is that hope is malleable, right? So with the right strategies, it can actually grow. So whether when you take the hope survey, your score is a 16 or a 30 today, remember this isn't fixed. This is informative and it's actually going to guide how we can support one another in moving this work forward. So as I said before, 30 minutes goes by rather quickly. It's been a wealth of strategy, resources, information on how to take this information from an educator perspective to begin to cultivate that culture of care. So my question now is, so what now what? So I'm certain or hopeful that after listening today that you may be interested and your interest may have been piqued about learning a little bit more. So if you're interested in exploring more or taking immediate action to move the work forward, here are just a few quick steps. So step number one, if you don't already have a Thrively account, now is the time to create one. You can scan the QR code on your screen, or there'll be a link in the follow-up email that you'll be able to access and sign up for a free Thrively account. So you can actually begin to just start playing around in the space and begin your strengths-based culture of care journey. Step number two, as a pre-winter break holiday gift for yourself, I invite you to take 25 to 30 minutes, if you haven't already done so, to complete the Thrively Strengths Assessment. Once you've completed the Strengths Assessment, you'll have your Strengths profile, and then the challenge by choice that I extend to all of you is to post your Strengths profile in a high traffic area in just your workspace. And believe me, what we've seen is that's a conversation starter, right? Like, first, what is this? And then as you start talking about it, they're looking at it, and some of your colleagues that feel that they know you really well, they'll say, wow, I didn't know that, I don't see that strength in you, or wow, like, that's very interesting. How does that show up in this space? So it is a true conversation starter. Step number three, before unplugging for the winter break, I invite you to spend just 2 minutes and to take the HOPE survey. And remember, that's going to give you baseline information on your current agency and pathways. And then step four, after we've had an opportunity to do all of that, I invite you to contact a Thrively team member so we can actually partner with you to begin to customize your strengths-based education wellness plan and those resources, right? Because all of our work, 99.9% of the time, is outward facing, supporting our students, supporting our families, supporting our communities. And at the same time, we have to carve out time to create that culture of care and culture of hope for us. And so starting with these initial Thrively framework resources, in addition to some strategies that have met success for some of our other schools and school colleagues, is a starting point to be able to move this work forward. All right, friends, we are at the end of our time together. So I want to thank you all for joining me today for our webinar, Care and Connection, Renewing Educator Spirit Mid-Year. If you have any questions, I'm going to go back over the chat to see if there are any there or any in the Q&A session, or section before I transition out. Or if you want to discuss and learn more about what I shared, please reach out to me directly. On the screen is my contact information and other ways that you can stay connected to Thrively and to learn more about the resources around strengths, well-being, hope, and connection. As a reminder, for our school-based educators, you can enter for a chance to win a free Thrively pilot account. There'll be a link sent in the follow-up email so that you can access that. And for everyone listening today, if you are someone that's interested in on-demand, self-paced, or self-paced learning professional development, you can receive free access to one of our Thrively micro-credential modules. The module is Educator Self-Care Level 1. If you are interested, you can send me an email directly at marion@thrively.com and I will sign you up and get you access to that. That's just a free resource for those of us that are attending live so that you can say, I may not be ready for some other steps, but I can self-pace to learn a little bit more about some of the resources that have been shared, some of those strategies, and to deepen my own knowledge around what does it mean to truly focus on educator self-care. I'm going to take a minute here to see if there are any questions that we may have in our chat before we actually move forward. So again, we will send a follow-up email to all registered participants with all of the information that I shared all in one place, the links, the resources, a wealth of information, right? So strategies, videos, so you'll have all of that. And I do recommend or invite you all, if you haven't signed up for our newsletter. I'll include a link there as well. But thank you all for just the privilege of your time today, for just joining us and really prioritizing yourself. It's sometimes asking a lot where it's, wow, I actually took time for myself for 30 minutes just to talk about how do I rebuild, replenish, and nourish myself. So thank you all for taking some time during a very busy time and working with me through that 1.5 minute glitch where the computer, so that's why I'm not looking here. I have to look at my other computer here. So hopefully I had a nice little side profile there. Appreciate that. And at the end of the day, let's continue to create a culture of care where educators' strengths are celebrated, their well-being is supported, and hope is instilled. And so I look forward to staying connected to all of you. Thank you all for your time. Have a great remainder of the academic year, but also the remainder of December before our winter break. Thank you all.